Well, I guess if I'm going to admit it, this may be the best place to do it. You see, back when I was a bit younger, Sailor Moon was always sort of a guilty pleasure of mine. I used to watch it all the time back when the show was on and just made sure that no one knew that I watched it. And you know what? I can't help what you guys may think.
It's okay. I'm used to all the geek and nerd comments.
But hey, what can you do? There's really no accounting for taste. And back when the show was on, it was just so incredibly cheesy that I couldn't help but fall in love with it. And here we are, many years later, talking about one of the several Sailor Moon games that were released. The one on today's episode is going to be Sailor Moon R for the Super Famicom, which was released exclusively in Japan. And before we start delving into the specifics of this particular game, I'd like to say a big thank you to fellow YouTuber and friend of the show, Kid Shoryuken, for graciously donating this game to the show. I really do appreciate it. Sailor Moon R on the Super Famicom is a beat-em-up game at its core, but it does come with a few other game modes to try out as well. This one is actually the second of the two Sailor Moon themed beat-em-up games for the Super Famicom, and your goal is to pick one of the Sailor Scouts and fight your way through 4 total stages. Granted, 4 stages does not sound like a lot, and it normally isn't, but these 4 are divided into several different segments and can be fairly lengthy. Even with only 4 levels, it still took me close to an hour to finish this one single player. Worth noting about the game too is that each of the selectable characters do play a bit differently, so there is some variety when it comes to the combat, even though there aren't many moves at your disposal. You have a regular attack button, a jump button, and A will execute your special attack. Keep in mind, like in most games in the genre, your health will deplete a little bit each time you use it. In the single-player game, each character also has a kind of super special move that can be used a few times with the X button as well, and this one can clear out a screen or take down a boss almost instantly. Another ability worth mentioning, of course, is your charge attack, which can be done by holding down the attack button. This will charge the meter above your life bar and shoot a projectile attack that will blast through several enemies at once. You can't move while charging it though, so you have to make sure that you're in position before you attempt it. And there is one thing about the game that I would like to mention as well that's a bit of an annoyance to me personally. You know, in most beat-em-up games, when you use a continue, you get to re-choose your character? Not in this one. Once you pick your starting character, well, you're stuck with her till the end of the game. Not a huge deal, mind you, but it does kind of irk me, especially in a game with 5 selectable characters. Also, you can't help but notice how good the game looks. Its presentation is really what initially drew me to it, since all the characters are large and detailed and the majority of the backgrounds do look great. Sure, there's never an inordinate amount of bedlam on the screen at one given time, but even with 2 players, it still maintains a pretty solid pace. The same thing goes for the sound and music too. Even though we're not really dealing with any pulse-pounding tunes or anything like that, they still do their job amicably. Worth noting are the sheer amount of voice samples that are used throughout the game, and for the most part they all sound great and do help to drive home the atmosphere. Earlier, I had mentioned that the game also had some other modes to it outside of just the main beat-em-up portion of the game, and it does indeed. You can also play a one-on-one fighting game mode a la Double Dragon on the NES that's fun for about 30 seconds before you never touch it again. In addition, there's also a separate version of the main game that can be played with Chibiusa. To wrap up, Sailor Moon R on the Super Famicom is a fun yet very simple beat-em-up game that pretty much any fan of the series is sure to enjoy. Sure, it's got a few issues here and there, like sloppy hit detection and some fairly aggravating AI at times, but overall, it is enjoyable and almost relaxing in a sense. It's worth picking up for the couple of bucks it will cost you to import it, and the good news here is that it's not a terribly hard to find or expensive game. The footage that you're seeing here was actually captured from a US Super Nintendo, thanks to friend of the show CRT Cade's excellent tutorial video on how to play Super Famicom games on a US Super Nintendo. Be sure to check that video out if you're interested in playing some of the great Japanese releases out there without having to worry about picking up another console. The mod in and of itself took me about 3 minutes before I was playing the game normally and with no issues. As always, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank each and every one of you for watching and subscribing. And until next time, stay classic.